The whole of the fourth chapter of Nedarim is about someone who swore not to benefit from their neighbor. And the chapter begins with a Mishnah, which is repeated in Megillah. In Megillah, there's a string of Mishnayot which begin with the words Ein Bain. There's no difference between. And one of these comes from our tractate, Ein Bain Hamudar Hanaya Mechavero. There's no difference between someone who swore not to benefit from his neighbor, Le Mudar Himenu Ma'achal, and someone who swore not to benefit from his food. So there's no difference between general benefit and food benefit, Eila Drisat Haregal, except the stepping of the foot, the access. And then we learn later food. And now we're going to deal with questions of food and access as they're intertwined in the seventh year. So the whole of the fourth chapter goes through these examples. They all start, by the way, with the same text, Hamudar. And now Hamudar means someone who's sworn. But let's now jump into our we're now in the fifth Mishnah, and we're now going to jump into questions of the sabbatical year. And we start, as usual, Hamudar. Hamudar Hanaya Mechavero. Someone sworn not to benefit from his neighbor or his friend. Lifnei Shvi'it. He makes this oath before the seventh year. Lo Yered Latoch Sadehu. Should not enter his field. Shouldn't have right of access over the field. Ve'eno ochel min hanotzot. We're talking about during the seventh year here, of course. We make the oath before the seventh year. But we're saying that in the seventh year, he doesn't have right of access. And we remember we explained when we began the whole chapter that right of access is it's a key right. It's right of access is included when we swear not to get benefit from someone. It'll come in the next chapter with two partners who own a courtyard. And in general, the land and property in the seventh year are hefker. They're completely ownerless. So we might think that even though he swore not to benefit from access to his neighbor's property, we might think, well, he can still walk over it in the seventh year because it doesn't belong to his neighbor in the seventh year. And the Gemara has a principle that it's possible to make a vow over something that endures even after the something is given away or passed away. So in other words, that vow which is made before the seventh year survives the transformation of the land and the fruit into hefker, into ownerless status during the seventh year. In other words, the vow made before the seventh year actually survived the process of the sabbatical year. So, Hamudar Hanaya Mechavero Lifnei Shvi'it, someone who swears not to benefit from his neighbor before the seventh year, Lo Yered Latoch Sadehu, can't enter his fields, Ve'eno Ochel Min Hanotzot, can't eat what hangs over, he can't get any benefit from his neighbor even in the seventh year. But, there's always a but. Uva Shvi'it, what if he made the vow in the seventh year? That's much more interesting because he's now made a vow over produce which doesn't belong to his neighbor anymore. Remember, in the seventh year, we don't own our produce. So when we say, oh, I swear not to benefit from my neighbor, well, I'm not going to benefit from my neighbor, but maybe I can benefit from stuff which did belong to my neighbor a year ago, but doesn't this year. And let's look at the Mishnah. Uva Shvi'it in the seventh year. Lo Yored Latoch Sadehu. He can't enter his field. So there's a feeling that he still derives some benefit from entering the field. Aval ochelhu min hanotzot. But he can eat what hangs over. The fruit itself is completely ownerless. So the The owner somehow still retains some rights in the field, but the food itself is completely ownerless. So he can't enter the field, but he can eat, say, I don't know, stuff hanging over the fence. What if he swore in respect of food before the seventh year? That's the other case which we brought up at the beginning of the chapter. So he swears not to benefit from his food before the seventh year. If he's just sworn not to benefit from his food, well, he can have right of access. That's what we learned in the first Mishnah of the chapter. He has right of access. He can go into his neighbor's field, but he can't eat from it. But he still can't eat from the fruits because he's sworn not to benefit from his neighbor's food, and that oath survives the seventh year. Now, if that oath was made in the seventh year, okay, so at that point, at that point, there is no more property. If he makes the oath in the seventh year, yored ve'ochel, he can have access, he can eat, because he has made an oath over something that absolutely doesn't have ownership in the seventh year. What about lending and borrowing? So that we're going to keep now going in the same style. All these Mishnayot begin, Hamudar, someone sworn. Hamudar hanayam chavero, someone sworn not to benefit from his neighbor. Lo yashilenu velo yishal mimenu, may not lend to him nor borrow from him. Now, this is interesting. We all understand why he can't borrow from him. If you're not going to benefit from your neighbor, clearly you can't borrow from him. But why can't you lend to him? The Rambam and the Bartanura, actually quoting the Rambam, says, if you get into the habit of lending to him, you will eventually borrow from him. If you lend to him, you'll borrow from him. That seems to be the reasoning. So we're not talking about benefit of interest, of course, because you can't take interest. But if you lend to him, you'll end up borrowing from him. And that's why, and so the Rambam says that the lending is a gezerah. Anyway, lo yashilenu velo yishal mimenu. We don't lend to him, we don't borrow from him. Lo yalvenu velo yalven mimenu. We don't loan to him and we don't take a loan from him. Velo yimkorlo velo yikach mimenu. We don't sell to him and we don't take from him. Or we don't sell to him and we don't buy from him. Again, the Mishnah seems to have no objection actually to selling from him. They think that we get benefit when we buy. But again, this is a gezerah. We're not going to sell to him because that selling to him might lead to buying. So how does it work out in practice? Amar lo. Actually, stop. This is not how it's working out in practice. This is a different situation. This is a situation related to Nedarim, but we've now changed topic completely. Let's just open a new chapter. Amar lo, he said to him. So some guy says to some other guy, Shileni parata. One guy says to another guy, lend me your cow. Maybe he needs to plow with the cow. Amar lo, eina pnuya. He says it's not available. Someone wants to borrow my cow. I very delicately refuse to lend him my cow. I say, it's not available today. I don't say I'm not going to lend it to you. I just say, it's not available today. And this guy gets really upset. Amar kunam sadi she'eni choreshba le'olam. He says kunam. That means let it be a temple property. If kunam sadi, let my field be temple property. If I ever plow the field with that cow, with it. In other words, I swear I will never, ever use your cow ever again in the future. I'm so upset with you. So what kind of situation have we got into here? I mean, and by the way, you can see how broigus begins. You can see how enmity begins. Something so simple like borrowing a cow. Maybe the cow really was occupied that day. Anyway, we're going to try to let this guy off a little bit. If he used to plow his own field, then he is still forbidden from plowing with that cow because he's taken a vow. But anybody else is permitted. In other words, anybody else can plow his field with the cow in question. So we've helped him out a little bit. But there's only so far. If he wasn't generally the plower, who v'chol adam asurim. Anybody plowing his field is forbidden to use that cow. It's a pity, but in this fit of anger, he's closed himself off from using this cow basically for the rest of his life.